A lot of people use video games as a form of escapism, as a way to lose focus on your current reality and enter a new one, even if it's just for a short amount of time. People might describe this as immersion, but do people really understand what that means? They might believe that the more realistic a video game appears, the more immersive it will be. But according to the Cambridge Dictionary, the definition of immersion is described as the fact of being completely involved in something. This could suggest that, despite the belief of some people, video game graphics might not have anything to do with immersion. To answer this, I've conducted multiple areas of research, and during this essay, I plan to present my findings to you and discuss whether the visual aesthetic of a video game can really affect how immersive it is. First, let's go deeper into what immersion really is. The book Rules of Play: Game Design Fundamentals seems to be a good place to start. Written by Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman, it goes over different important areas of game design. One section talks about immersion and quotes programmer and game designer Francis Dominique Laramé as saying,
"All forms of entertainment strive to create suspension of disbelief, a state in which the player's mind forgets that it is being subjected to entertainment and instead accepts what it perceives as reality."
Francis believes that video games should be aiming to make their player completely forget the fact that they're playing a video game, and they should believe the reality presented by the game. However, Salen and Zimmerman take this idea and describes it as the immersive fallacy.
According to the immersive fallacy, this reality is so complete that ideally the frame folds away so that the player truly believes that he or she is part of an imaginary world.
However, even if a video game was able to provide a completely realistic experience both through graphics and gameplay, the player would still be aware, at least on a subconscious level, that they're just playing a video game. You, as the player, know that when you were killed in Call of Duty because you accidentally threw a cooked grenade at the wall in front of you, that the grenade isn't really going to do anything to your real self. Frank Lance, a game designer and director at the New York University Game Center, did a talk at the Game Developer Conference back in 2005 about the immersive fallacy and why he believes true immersion is not always good for video games. He describes the example of a bear about to attack your friend. You could shout out the word bear and they would know exactly what that word means.
The word bear would not be better if it had teeth and could kill you. In fact, it would be much, much worse. It would be pointless.
He argues that this would also be true for a drawing of a bear on a cave wall, or even a video game called Bear. These things would not be made better by being actual bears. He states that the sense of freedom created by a video game such as Grand Theft Auto is only created by carefully limiting what the player can or cannot do. The main points to take away is that while adding more features and realism could be a good thing for some games, creating a realistic world doesn't just create an engaging experience. You still need to fit a game in there. But can you only be immersed in a realistic game? After all, the dictionary definition described earlier just says something that you can be completely involved in. I've been completely involved in Tetris before. In fact, Tetris is a game known for its addictive gameplay. Some people have been known to lose hours of time playing it, trying to get a higher score. The game's creator, Alexei Pachinov, described the reasoning behind the game's addictive nature and popularity.
Tetris is a very simple game, but it appeals to many players because it's both visually and intellectually challenging. I think that's what makes the game so addictive. We have an inherent desire to create order out of chaos, and Tetris satisfies that desire on a very basic level, while being easy to understand and quick to learn.
Based on our definition of immersion, this fact means that you could describe Tetris as an immersive experience. But when you're playing Tetris, you don't believe that you are there placing the blocks yourself. So how does Tetris provide a sense of immersion? Ernest Adams wrote an article for Gamersutra.com back in 2004 called Postmodernism and the Three Types of Immersion. In it, Ernest shares his theory that immersion is split into three categories. Tactical immersion is often seen in fast-paced games. It's where your brain stops considering what buttons on the controller you're pressing, and instead you just react to what you're doing.
When you're tactically immersed in a game, your higher brain functions are largely shut down and you become a pair of eyes directly communicating with your fingers. It's an almost meditation-like state, the Tetris trance.
Strategic immersion is when a player is entirely focused on the goal and what they need to do to get there, what moves they need to perform and what shot they need to take. They're just focused on the win.
Chess players couldn't care less that the pieces are named for the members of a medieval court. The only thing that matters is where they are and how they move.
Finally, narrative immersion. It's fairly self-explanatory as it's just a story that's good enough to get involved in.
A player gets immersed in a narrative when he or she starts to care about the characters and wants to know how the story is going to end.
I theorize that immersion can be broken up into three different categories. Mechanical immersion, where immersion is gained through gameplay. Usually fast-paced or strategic gameplay like the previously described theories of tactical and strategic immersion. Narrative immersion, like in Ernest Adams' article, this would be the player's involvement in the story and role-playing aspects of the game, when you're excited to see what happens next or enjoy acting out how your character would act. Then finally, visual immersion. This is where a player's immersion is directly impacted by the visual aesthetic. The last step of our journey involves some primary research I conducted. Based on everything we've seen so far, it seems that immersion shouldn't be directly affected by the involvement of realistic visuals. Games like Tetris allow for a sense of immersion through its unique visuals and a sense of challenge, providing mechanical immersion. As Frank Lance argues, that making a game entirely realistic can lead to an unappealing experience. But what do you, the player, think? I created an online survey and shared it wherever I could to get as many responses as possible. In total, I received 46 responses, and I believe the results to be quite telling. First, I asked which part of the game people felt was most important when playing a video game. I split this up into 4 possible answers: gameplay, audio, graphics, and story. Out of the 46 people, 20 decided that gameplay should be the most important part of any game. While 18 people said story, 7 people said graphics, and not a single person chose audio. Rest in peace, audio designers and soundtrack musicians. So, that's it then. About half the responses chose gameplay, whilst only 7 chose graphics. Surely that means graphics don't affect a game's immersion. Not quite. I wanted to go a bit deeper than just a surface level response. So next I presented 2 images of similar games. The first image was a screenshot of the popular battle royale game Fortnite, and the other image was a screenshot of the other popular battle royale game, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. To make it as fair as possible, I chose 2 images that are as similar to each other as possible. Both images were taken in-game from a third-person perspective of the player, looking at buildings in a town at roughly midday with clear weather. I asked that using the images provided and no previous knowledge of each game, that the responders choose which game they find more visually appealing, and which game they would be more likely to play based on what they could see. These answers were close, but there was still a clear winner. Roughly 60 to 65% of people chose Fortnite for both questions. I did the same again, this time with 2 new images of popular open-world adventure games. The first was of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and the other of Red Dead Redemption 2. Both images are of the player character riding a horse at sunset by a lake or river with trees in view, to help keep everything fair. I asked the responders the exact same 2 questions as before, and this time the responses were a bit closer. About 55% of people chose the image of Breath of the Wild for both questions. So far so good. Majority of people chose the stylized game graphics over the realistic one, suggesting that they could get immersed in something that doesn't represent reality. But I have one final set of questions in my survey. The fact of being completely involved in something. The dictionary definition of immersion. I presented this definition to my survey responders, and asked that with that definition in mind, do they believe that the more realistic a game appears, the more immersive it is? I received the same split as before, as about 60% of responses said no. To go further, I asked if these people felt that Tetris provides an immersive experience, and about 65% of people said yes, Tetris does provide an immersive experience. A couple people who had stated that realism doesn't affect game immersion had also just stated that Tetris could provide immersion. Through all my previously shown research and findings, I've come to a conclusion. How does aesthetics affect video game immersion? They play a large part. Alexei Pajitnov, creator of Tetris, believed that people found his game addicting because of the colourful visuals. Francis Dominique Lemaire thought that all media should be made for its target audience to forget about their reality and feel like they're in a new one. A game can provide a sense of immersion through its visuals even when they aren't realistic. They just need to keep the player focused on the game and not their surroundings to provide immersion. Because of this, I still believe in my theory of the 3 types of immersion. Mechanical immersion for when a player is so focused on gameplay and strategy that they've completely forgotten about what time it is anymore, like that time I accidentally played Civilization 4 until 4 AM when I had a college lecture the next morning. Narrative immersion for when the player is focused on the story and characters. They care for the characters around them, or what will happen to them next. Or the player cares for their own role-playing avatar that they spend hours making in the character creator. And finally, visual immersion, when a game's graphics draw you straight in and you want to see everything you can, even if it's just a bunch of pretty looking blocks. Video game immersion is defined by the experiences players have in the game, and what appeals to them.